Well, to switch
Seriously.
gears here to the island of Puerto Rico, which of course is still recovering from natural disasters and man-made ones as well that sort of feed on the natural disasters, particularly in the wake of Hurricane Fiona. We are very honored to be joined by Damary Burgos, who is a member of the Solidarity Brigade of the West. Has been organizing around issues of aid and relief in Puerto Rico since Hurricane Maria. Also an art professor with the Pontifical Catholic University of Puerto Rico. Damary, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, the honor is all ours. I think oftentimes with any big natural disaster, people hear that it happens, and then a couple weeks later, they don't know what's going on. What is the state of the island right now? I mean, are people still without power, without water, other things like that? Where do things stand in the wake of the hurricane?
So I'm not sure if you hear me okay. Am I?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We can hear
okay.
you.
Thank you. The island has become slightly polarized. Our side of the island still has a lot of communities without electricity and without running water. The metropolitan area, I hear, is pretty much back to normal. And of course, as it happens up north, the countryside, the mountains, the coastal area, the black and brown, largely communities, um, have been forgotten by the metropolis and definitely by the empire as well. We're struggling for sure, and have a lot of elders over here that have medical conditions that have been worsened by the instability of our electrical system. That after Maria, and I have to say, a lot of people from the US think that, wow, after all the money that we've sent you, well, the reality is that they've been promises. Puerto Rico has received less than 5% of what was promised after Maria. And I would say 95% of that has gone back up north to private contracting organizations, has not stayed here in Puerto Rico. We have been forced by FEMA to privatize our electrical company, and our electrical company was far from great before Hurricane Maria, but has gotten so much worse after Maria. And a lot of it has to do with the inexpertise and the lack of experience, and to be quite frank, the ignorance that foreigners have towards our topography and our geography. Our mountainous areas are extremely difficult to navigate, and we have a very complex system that, being a Caribbean island nation, people from Canada just, I'm sorry, but can't really understand. And that's normal. I would never go to Canada expecting to understand how their geographical situation is. So it's been aggravated, and it's been aggravated by austerity measures that were implemented under the Barack Obama administration. And I have to say that with a lot of pain, because we had such hopes for that presidency, but Promesa has taken us from poor to miserable. And a lot of the vulnerabilities that we are facing right now have direct causes in the austerity that started before Hurricane Maria.
So you mentioned the electrical grid, and I think that's kind of like the way it collapsed after this last hurricane. You mentioned the privatization. You mentioned the oversight board. It's almost like this horrible neoliberal, neo-colonial privatization experiment, like from made in some sort of nightmarish laboratory that we've seen play out in Puerto Rico. Can you elaborate a bit? You have this company called Luma, right? That was given a contract after the electrical grid was privatized. You also have the role of McKinsey, which is a very, at least in our circles in the United States, a very hated consulting firm that, there's some corrupt elements going on here where they were telling the oversight board what to do, and it was their client that got the contract to privatize the electrical grid. You mentioned foreign workers. I guess I'm curious if you could just elaborate on those points, because after this hurricane, the entire island was left without electricity, not just for a day or two, but like for weeks. And you're saying there's still people who are without. So how did Puerto Rico get there? And I guess what was the role of the US in this? Big question.
So I don't think we have time to go into
Right.
520 some odd years of colonialism, but I'll
Fair
try
enough.
to do my very best. Yes, Puerto Rico is an experiment for all of that, what you're saying. And I will even link it to the previous brother who was on, and I'm sorry that I didn't hear his name, but we have generations of political prisoners that have been imprisoned by the U.S. Federal prison system because, as a direct result of trying to struggle for Puerto Rico's independence and liberation. So, yes, it's not. It sounds. I don't know how to say, sort of, like sci-fi what you're saying, but the reality is that we have been an imperialistic experiment since the U.S. arrived here in 1898. Our women have been experimented on with birth control and have been sterilized. There's like so much documentation about this. So fast forwarding over to Luma. Yes, FEMA decided that we were not trustworthy to manage so much money, and I can't say that they're completely off. We are definitely suffering also from a corrupt national government, and that I would never deny that. But they've had some powerful teachers, I have to say. They have had some real instruction up north. So however bad the corruption is here in house, the role models are just exponentially larger. So yes, we have right now a governor who was Promesa's lawyer in the beginning of the fiscal board. So imagine how many levels of vulnerability elders have here, poor people have here, single mothers have here. When the schools, for example, just to give one example, schools have traditionally been the refuge for people when we are in hurricane season here. It's the place that communities go to wait out the storm. 900 of our schools were closed before Maria and after Maria. So now where do people go? It's such a nightmare that I can't even begin to tell you. In 2016, because of the austerity measures, Lisa Donahue arrived to our island and took with her about $4 million in salary and decided that we had too many things in our warehouses in the electrical company. And, we're a little island. We don't need all this stuff. Get rid of all this surplus and you're wasting too much money. That's why we were months and months without electricity after Maria, because we didn't have enough materials on the island to respond. So when you couple that with 40,000 state workers that were laid off previously before 2016, it's like a disaster that has been engineered, and that's what it feels like. And people are beyond tired. They're beyond frustrated, and there's a lot of rage out here. And I am concerned sometimes that we don't have the political leaders to direct an outright revolution right now, and people's rage is real, and people's patience is wearing out over here. So yeah, it's a little bit worrisome, and I'm afraid that people up north have like no idea what's brewing on down here.
No, I think I think people have no idea what's going on, and I think the sad part is that a lot of people who are hearing things now about Puerto Rico, it's how it's like a gold rush down there. You can get a cheap house, you can live on the beach, and I was hoping you could talk about that element of it as well, because one of the things I'm reading is that after Maria, after Fiona, people are sort of forced to leave, but that then opens up even more scope for the exploitation of the island for this. I don't even want to call it tourism because that makes it sound benign. But if you could speak to this sort of gentrification element of how this is all playing out.
So I think that by United Nations definitions, we are facing population displacement and genocide over here, is really how it's been defined. And that sounds really severe to say, because I don't want to be insensitive to people who are living a war, but that's what we're facing. It's a quiet war that has been going on for decades now. And what you're talking about is gentrification is what we're facing at the moment. There are tons of communities, and especially on my side of the island, because I have to say objectively, it's the prettiest side of the island. It's the most beautiful side of the island, the Southwest. A lot of the communities are battling, are struggling to find housing because the houses that are vacant have been used for Airbnbs. And so then you add a housing crisis on top of everything else that we're going through, and it's really a disaster, just in the midst. We are facing a lot of crypto millionaires and these hotshot. I'm sorry to say it, but these white guys, because they are mostly white guys, coming and buying up just tons of land and tons of housing. We've had cases where these guys will come and they'll buy an apartment building and then throw everybody out. And you have till the end of the month, elders who've been living in this property for 36 years and 50 some odd years, all of a sudden have to, in their later years, when they think that they're ready for retirement and just to enjoy, are being vacated. And that's huge, and it's something that is extremely destabilizing for communities, and especially these communities like our region that are hot tourist spots. And it's not that we're against tourism, but we're definitely in the midst of a climate crisis, and having an economy that is ever more dependent on that kind of exploitation just heightens our vulnerability all the more.
Wow.
But on the flip side, there are a lot of people who are doing the work that needs to get done, and there's a lot of organizing happening, grassroots organizing. I think that contrary to what we saw after Maria, people are putting their money into grassroots organizations that are on the ground and doing some incredibly beautiful mobilization and inspirational organizational work. So I have to be hopeful because there's nothing else.
Yeah, no, I hear you 100%. Sorry, Ronnie, go ahead.
Win at the end of the day.
Well, I was just going to ask, moving off of that, what can those who are watching, who, I mean, aren't in Puerto Rico, do to help in the situation? And what direction would you point them to maybe try to find organizations that they, local organizations they can donate to, or anything else they might be able to do to advocate for the right side of things?
There's a lot of information on social media. If people want to look into our organization, we're called Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, but there are so many other organizations, and we have also linked with a lot of them, so people can do some research. Taller Salud, Casa Pueblo. There are many different organizations that are doing some really important work on the ground, and I think that that's really the way to go. It's kind of a schizophrenic existence, because when you're on the ground, it's very powerful, the work that's being done. But we're also losing a lot of sleep. And like you said in the beginning, I'm supposed to be a college professor. My class is coming in any minute now. I was answering emails and connecting people for insulin purchase last night until 11:30 at night. In the morning, we woke up with some very extremely heartbreaking situations, and so we're tired. We're tired. There's a lot of energy being put in to the real reconstruction work that is much more. Um, it's much more profound than putting up roofs and putting up tarps. It's talking to people and making them aware of why we're vulnerable and how, being a Caribbean nation, we grow up learning how to prepare for hurricanes. This is not a natural disaster. This is a political disaster. And that is something that I think people up north need to understand. We can handle a Category 1 hurricane. We could handle a 4 and 5. It's not what you hope for, but children grow up here learning what to do. What you don't learn how to deal with is a medical system that's been collapsed and influxed by private companies and pharmaceutical companies that make our elders vulnerable. You don't learn how to deal with the veracity and the greed that comes from colonial exploitation. You don't know how to deal with gentrification. You don't learn about these things when you grow up. You learn how to deal with the hurricane, and we can
Right.
deal with the hurricane. And if we had independence, we would have um, sister islands around us that are more than happy to help us the way we help other sister islands when they need us. But of course, our relationship with the United States is an exploitative relationship that makes that kind of solidarity amongst Caribbean nations virtually impossible. And that's what I think that the message needs to be, that Puerto Rico needs to gain its independence, and we need to be talking about reparations.
No, absolutely. Well, obviously, you've got a ton on your plate, so we really appreciate you joining us here, helping us demystify all of this and giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Thank you.